We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks to all of you for being here on a bright sunny Thursday morning. It's already been a long day, but we're glad to see you here. Thanks so much for coming to the Spring 2022 Sonoma State Campus Budget and Planning Forum. My name is Karen Moransky. I'm Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs. And I am welcoming you on behalf of President Judy Sakaki, who until late yesterday afternoon had planned to be here today to provide this welcome herself. Unfortunately, she's not able to be here with us today, but she asked me to convey her great appreciation to all of you who are joining today, both here in person in our ballroom, as well as in our virtual world. This is a time for us to learn more about our budget and to participate in the decision-making processes that help Sonoma State commit to a sustainable pathway to serving our students, supporting our faculty and staff, increasing enrollment, and moving our institution forward as a public liberal arts focused institution that provides its students with opportunities to build a bright future for themselves and their loved ones. So thanks, and President Sakaki is here in spirit. As always, budget forums like this one, I'm gonna move us along here. And we put a couple of slides together last night, so I'm sorry that's a little wordy. But as always, budget forums like this one speak to the importance of broad and consistent communication about strategic planning and budgeting, particularly as the campus addresses a significant budget deficit created by enrollment declines, especially during COVID. When prospective students who might have come from other parts of the state stayed home during the pandemic. We must now think and act as a smaller university while rebuilding our enrollment. We need to strive for new models in budget decision-making with deeper consultation across campus constituencies, and I will talk about some of those efforts in just a moment. In the midst of change, we must open ourselves up to more and deeper change if we are to own the important role we play in higher education. Our brand of education, with close faculty-student interaction, with a broad array of student services, with an engaged residential community, and with online and hybrid courses that promise active, engaged learning, is one the students of the state of California need badly right now, our form of education. Our scale and our close-knit community offers a safe space for our diverse student body to bring their strengths and assets, to grow and develop, to bring prosperity to their families and communities, and to do good work in the world. We can serve students in a way no other CSU can. And to do that, we must become more flexible, more nimble, more interdisciplinary, more collaborative, more conscious of the great value and capacities of our staff and our faculty, and more forward-thinking. That kind of progress is possible through the information sharing and shared decision-making that we engage in here today. The President wishes to thank PBAC, the President's Budget Advisory Committee, and several of you are in the room and I hope online today, for their work in advising senior administrators, sharing in decision-making, and keeping the campus educated and informed. She thanks the Academic Senate leadership, the chairs of governance committees, and all the faculty and staff who participate in shared governance. Shared governance is hard, and it can be messy, But it is crucial and at the core of institutions like ours that value democratic processes, pluralism, and the strength and power of each individual voice to contribute to a better society. A society in which we value difference, repair the injustices of the past, and commit to doing better by working better together. We also thank the Academic Affairs Budget Advisory Working Group, chaired by Dr. Emily Acosta-Lewis and Mike Ogg, which is not only planning budget reductions for the campus's largest division, but is more importantly piloting ways to rethink the way we manage budget decision-making. They are exploring ways to reorganize and reframe to ensure long-lasting sustainability for the academic core. And the path they are charting will have long-lasting implications for the campus as a whole. We look forward to hearing about their work later in the semester. We can't talk about the campus budget without talking about strategic planning. Aligning our budget to our strategic priorities and our core values is truly important work, especially when and as we have difficult conversations about the budget deficit. Nothing is easy right now, but if we continue to keep our priorities and values at the forefront, even when the needs are great and the decisions are especially hard, we can feel pride, energy, and a sense of accomplishment. We continue to invest in our strategic priorities and core values and see tangible progress and improvement. And I wanted to explore some examples. Student success is still our top priority. And, in what I find just an amazing feat, we continue to make progress. We continue to make progress in our equity gaps. We lowered our equity gaps even during the pandemic. Our gaps are amongst the lowest in the system at 1.4% for Latinx, Black, and Indigenous students, and at 3.2% for our low-income students. You know why that's possible? That's possible because of the staff in advising and tutoring and in DSS and all of the units across campus. It's possible because of the ASCs and the ACs in the departments that are answering questions online and in person so that our students feel connected, they feel informed, and they feel a sense of belonging. That's what's cutting our equity gaps. That is what's cutting our equity gaps, alongside the wonderful work of our faculty who have continued to do the amazing work of flexing back and forth between teaching online and teaching in person and teaching hybrid and teaching in every way that's going to help students to learn, to grow, and to achieve their goals. So that's why we continue to make progress. We continue to be the first in the system for transfer graduation rates and in the top quartile of the system for our four-year graduation rates. Student retention also improved this year. Fall to spring retention improved for the latest first year and transfer cohort, this year's cohort, and for subpopulations, including first generation and our Latinx, Black, and Indigenous students. Fall to spring retention rates did not, however, improve as much. They did improve, but not as much for our first generation and underrepresented students as those of their peers. So we still have some gaps that we need to address as we move forward. We need to pay increased attention to retention from one semester to the other as we reach the end of the graduation initiative. The campus also participated in the C Success program to provide iPads for new students in the spring, enhancing student achievement and creating more equitable opportunities. And you only had to be there at the giveaway of those iPads to see the delight in students' faces as they got those and realized that they would not have to do their work on their phones anymore. So that was a really important piece for our new students. Health, safety, and wellness for students, faculty, and staff is still a key priority. Sonoma State boasts an extremely low transmission rate. We have 2,000 students in the residence halls. The campus is open, and we're at about 66% in person in our courses. We have increased funding for CAPS and for basic needs initiatives through Graduation Initiative 2025 to provide essential services for our students. We're hiring tenure-track faculty again, despite the budget deficit and because of GI 2025 and the AB 1460 funding that we received. And there is nothing like talking with bright candidates who want to come to Sonoma State to boost morale and help us see the future at Sonoma State. Faculty and student research is being supported by continued funding through a variety of sources, and our faculty have continued to be extremely productive at grant getting during the pandemic, and women faculty have led the way, contrary to the trend nationwide, which has seen a decrease in women faculty getting grants and being able to get grants because of the pandemic. We're taking on the challenges of endemic racism and white supremacy in our pedagogies through work like the Tips for Justice grant, in our recognition of the invisible labor of BIPOC faculty and staff, engaging in support for our increasingly diverse student body, and through our interpersonal relationships in departments and units all over campus. We now have to look inward at ourselves, at the way we treat people, at the underlying assumptions that govern our behavior, and at the implicit practices that continue to affect our work. That is hard work, but we cannot cast blame outside until we have made changes inside. That is a big part of what will enable us to recruit and retain faculty, staff, and students. We aim for continued flexibility for our workforce, and we have extended the telecommute program through the end of May so we can assess its benefits and its challenges. There's no easy answer for any of this. We have to be back in person for our traditional age students who are delighted to be back in person and who need our in-person services and contact with people. Zoom is not enough to help students reacclimate to the world, to working with people. Having said that, though, we know some of our students and our faculty and our staff need the convenience, the flexibility, and the safety and accessibility of online. We will never be 100% in person again. But we have a campus that is beautiful, that is built to connect people to people in classrooms, labs, the library, the residence halls, and all the gathering spaces. And isn't it amazing to have Lobos open again? Yay. Woo, please go right ahead. Strategic enrollment, headed by the persistent and energetic Elias Lopez, is making enormous strides. With a full staff of recruiters and a new director of outreach, they are moving back into Southern California and the rest of the state to bring back students who stayed local. Partnerships with community colleges are bringing new transfer students into our programs. And we have invested in marketing in new and more informative and more student-friendly financial aid award letters and other communications. And we have offered nearly 3,200 recruitment scholarships. We're building new systems and technology, and we're hosting Decision Day at the Green Music Center, thank you, Jacob, for the first time on April 23rd. All of those efforts are beginning to have an impact on our numbers. We have seen day over day and total increases in the number of applications, the number of admits, and the number of deposits from last year. Those increases won't help us get back to target in the next couple of years. But if we all help, we can stop the decline in total student enrollment and start us back on an upward trajectory. And of course, Laura will have more information about our current situation and what the next couple of years look like if we don't increase those numbers. We have a new outreach staff member whose job it is to engage faculty, alums, staff, and students. If you're interested in that, email Elias Lopez. Yes, he told me to say that. And let him know. We'll get you scheduled. Change is imminent. Big change must happen if we are to make our way out of the enrollment and budget deficits we face. I have been saying, we all have been saying for 2 years that we must be willing to forsake the comfortable, the way we always did things, and the structures and practices that are easy and well known. The Budget Advisory Working Group in Academic Affairs has accepted that challenge and are being bold and visionary, and so must we all. Change on top of 2 years of pandemic is hard, really, really hard, but we quite simply cannot afford not to. So take a breath, marshal your energy, roll up your sleeves, and let's get to work. Our work is paying off, so let's keep going. Thanks to Laura Lupe and to our new Vice President for Administration and Finance, Monir Ahmed, and their staff for organizing this budget forum. We could not be in better hands, and you'll hear from both of them momentarily. So thank you, and we will continue with the program. Laura?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Karen. I'm Laura Lupe. I'm the Associate Vice President for University Budget and Resource Planning. I'll be providing the spring budget briefing, which gives me a chance to update you all on everything we know about planning for the budget for the 22-23 year. So I'm going to start with one of the main drivers of our budget, which is the state budget allocation. So every year, the Board of Trustees for the CSU submits a budget request to the state and asks for new funding for the next year. And the details of that are outlined there on the column on the left. So this year, the Board of Trustees asked for increased funding from the state for a total new budget of increased base budget of $715.5 million. And they asked for funding for categories for things for our students, for things like graduation initiative, basic needs, and student technology, items for our employees in the areas of employee compensation, and items to fund the future of the CSU, for things like academic infrastructure, strategic enrollment growth across the CSU, mandatory costs. And then in January every year, the governor releases his first budget proposal. So this year, the governor's budget proposal details $344.1 million of increased base funds for the CSU. And you can see that column there on the right-hand side. In the governor's proposal, he's allocated $12 million to the CSU for foster youth program supports, $121 million for strategic enrollment growth across the system, and then $211 million of unallocated funds, which equals 5% increase over the general fund base of what the CSU has this year. So, though it's too early to really tell how much that might impact the campuses, we can tell how much we might get based on our campus's proportion of the CSU budget and what we've gotten historically. So we could receive maybe about $162,000 of the foster youth support programming funds, and then up to $5 million of the unallocated $211 million. But it's up to the CSU and the Chancellor's Office to determine what programs there on the left, what priorities that the CSU has identified that $211 million would go to. So for example, they'll outline that funds need to go to mandatory costs or employee compensation, etc. But you can see that the right-hand column is lower than the left-hand column. That's just math. So the Chancellor's Office will continue to advocate to the state through the rest of the budget cycle to bump up the right-hand column there through the rest of the spring and the summer. The January governor's budget proposal also includes some one-time funds for the CSU, including $100 million for deferred maintenance and academic infrastructure across the CSU, $83 million for an energy innovation center at CSU Bakersfield, and $50 million for improvements at CSU University Farms. Now, the Board of Trustees had requested $1 billion to address deferred maintenance across the CSU because there's a huge backlog. So this is another area that the CSU will be continuing their advocacy. And Monir will talk a little bit more about the state and CO budget advocacy in his remarks later. So we are still early in the state and CSU budget timeline. You all are working on your taxes right now, and that's going to give the state a little bit more information about what the revenue receipts are going to look like for next year. So the governor will release a May revision to the budget with that updated information, and that'll give us a better idea of what our final budget might look like. Then the legislature passes their budget in June and the governor signs it, and we get our final allocation from the Chancellor's Office with that budget in July. So there's a lot of churn left to happen. So those numbers I just showed you will likely change, but that's what we're working on for planning right now with our state allocation. So even though that's what we know right now and it's likely to change, there's still a lot that we can do on the campus side to plan for 22-23 while we wait for all of the dust to settle on the state side. And we do know that we're going into the 22-23 year with a deficit. So it was really important this year that we start budget planning early. And it's also important, since we're operating with a deficit, that we look at it from a multi-year perspective. So now I'm going to go over our multi-year plan. And I'm going to look at it starting with our second major driver of our budget, which is enrollment. So Karen talked a little bit about enrollment, and we know that we have been losing student headcount enrollment over the past couple of years. And so it's really important to understand how that affects our budget. So this slide shows our budgeted enrollment. This is not actual enrollment, and this is annualized enrollment. So we have a couple different ways that we look at enrollment on campus, so I want to be clear what these numbers are. These are not our strategic enrollment management goals. We are shooting for something different. As Karen mentioned, we're doing our strategic enrollment management team is doing a lot of different initiatives to increase our headcount, and these are not actuals. So what we do each year for budget is we project what we are going to have for our student headcount so that we can set our tuition budget. So that's what these numbers are. You can still see that the trend line starting in 18-19, we budgeted 8,900 students, and then we are trending down as we catch up with the actuals. So for our current year, we budgeted about 6,900 heads, and we're projecting that we continue to decrease in the 22-23 and 23-24 years. So these projections are based on historical actuals of our application and yield rates. So as our strategic enrollment management efforts start to yield results, and our application, retention, and incoming classes change, then these projected numbers will change. But this is what we've built based on historical actuals, and that's what's built into our multi-year plan for now. So what we have looking forward is 2 more years of decline before we start stabilizing. So what that means for our multi-year plan, there's a lot of information on this slide, so let me talk you through it one piece at a time. This is our multi-year budget plan, essentially, with our deficit. So this slide shows our revenues and our expenses. Our revenues are the blue line, our expenses are the green line. So it starts in the 1920 year, and you can see there on the left-hand side of the slide in 1920, our revenues and our expenses were essentially the same, which is sort of ideally what you want to see in a budget. You want a balanced budget. And then as we move forward through time, this budget goes out through 2025, 2026, you can see that there's a gap between the revenues and the expenses. And the expenses are higher than the revenues, which is not what you want to see in a financially healthy organization. And as you see the enrollment sort of flatten out, as I showed you on the previous slide, the gap, it sort of stabilizes over time, but the gap doesn't close. And the red dotted line is the deficit, which sort of peaks in the 22-23 year. So if you look at the 21-22 deficit, that's $11.2 million. That's the current year deficit. So in the fall budget forum, I talked through what our $11.2 million deficit was, what the composition of the deficit is. That video is still available on the budget website if you would like to review the composition of the $11.2 million deficit. That is a base deficit, and we resolved it with one-time funds this year. What that means is that that base deficit rolls forward to next year. And we have additional losses of revenue, including reduced headcount projected for next year, other losses of revenue, and other increases of expenses that are increasing that projected deficit to $15.5 million for next year. Additionally, if we don't do anything to resolve that deficit, it continues on throughout the rest of the years. And as Karen mentioned earlier, with the projections that I currently have, enrollment doesn't resolve itself and get back to target in this time frame. So you can see that the deficit doesn't close itself. So we either need to increase revenues more or decrease expenses. So again, these are preliminary numbers. These will change before the final budget. The state allocation will change. The enrollment numbers are still preliminary, but these are our planning numbers for now. So knowing that we had a base deficit this year that we were rolling forward to next year, we started conversations back in the fall about how we were going to tackle this with campus leadership, with campus governance. This is a long-term base budget that we need to start looking at how we're going to reduce expenses, increase revenues. Strategic enrollment management has been making headway on increasing student headcount to increase revenue, but we've also lost quite a few student headcount in the meantime. So as Karen said, we need to act like a smaller university in the meantime, and that means reducing expenses. So we've established a reduction plan that we know for now the current projected deficit for 22-23 is $15.5 million, or 11% of this current year's budget. And that's a pretty substantial deficit, and it's difficult to tackle all of that in 1 year. So what we've created is a multi-year reduction plan, and that entails managing 50% of the reduction with base cuts in the current year. And those cuts are going to the division allocated by the share of the marginal cost formula. So what I want to talk about that for a moment, because when we did cuts in 2021, we did them based on proportional share of budget. And that's because those cuts came from the state allocation. But these reductions are based on enrollment. And when we get new money or lose money, so increases or decreases based on student count, we allocate or deallocate those funds based on the marginal cost formula. And that's because the marginal cost formula is the amount of money it takes to teach and support a single student. So if we were getting new money from the state, if we were getting new students, we would provide money to the divisions to teach those students based on this same calculation. But because we're losing students, we're deallocating funds from the division based on that same calculation. So as we're removing funds based on lower enrollment, when the enrollment comes back, we'll allocate it back out to divisions based on this same formula. So this slide shows the reduction plan by division. The total reduction amount is half of the projected deficit. This is the base reduction is half of the deficit. It's 7.8 million. I do want to touch on why the largest amount is going to academic affairs next year. It's because the largest portion of the marginal cost formula is for instruction. So again, the marginal cost formula is based on the cost to teach and support a single student, and the largest portion of that is, of course, for instructing students. So if we were allocating out 7.8 million, I wish that's what this slide was showing you today, the largest amount would go to academic affairs. But because we're reducing 7.8 million, the largest portion of the reduction is going to academic affairs. So the other 50% of the deficit will be managed utilizing one-time funds. This is similar to the approach that we've used in the past couple of years. We've utilized one-time funds to close portions of our deficit in 2021 and 21-22. So this is still part of the plan to be finalized, but these approaches will look similar to what we've done in the past couple of years. We'll utilize university reserves, we'll sweep hiring savings to the center, utilize roll forward funds, approaches like that. We're working through this now as we analyze our projections for year end, looking at our available funds, etc. And the current plan is that we will continue this approach across a multi-year plan until we close the deficit. So what does that look like? So this is our multi-year budget plan again, with our revenues in blue, our expenses in green, and the deficit there in a red dashed line, but the multi-year reduction plan has been applied. So you can see the deficit start to reduce dramatically after we start to apply the reductions in 22-23. And the deficit itself, the revenues and expenses, there meet in 25-26. And again, these are all preliminary numbers, so if the strategic enrollment management, if the head count starts changing, we could close the deficit earlier in 25-26, those types of things. So that helps us close the deficit, whereas in the previous slide, it just sort of went on in perpetuity. So in the state and in the CSU, on campus, we are still in the midst of our spring budget timeline. Currently, the divisions are in the middle of their budget call. Units are working through their budget plans. They have been provided with these reduction amounts that I showed you earlier, and they are working through plans for next year to take those reductions. They have started those conversations, like I said, last fall, early this spring. They have been going through leadership, through consultative committees, especially in academic affairs. And so those will continue to happen throughout the spring until we finalize them in the summer. So it is not an easy time in our budget conversations, but I really appreciate all of your engagement and showing up today to learn more about the budget situation that we're in. This presentation will be available on our budget.sonoma.edu website, and as well as our campus budget plan. And last year's budget forum is also available. As always, please feel free to contact me or my office with any questions that you have. And that is all that I have for you today. Thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it over to our new Vice President, Munir Ahmed, for his perspective. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I am really looking forward to the day when I can see all of your full face, not just the eyes. So, but in the meantime, we really appreciate you coming here and spending some time with us during this difficult time to listen to even more difficult conversations that we must have. Thank you to the provost for setting the right tone, and Laura for giving us some details on the numbers and so forth. I'm going to focus a little bit on, as this is my first meeting with all of you in this context, so I'm going to try to take us a little bit out of our internal operational perspective into the bigger picture, right? So, many of us feel if we're going to be in higher ed, California is the best place to be. And if at no other time it was as clear, it is now. The state, not only throughout the pandemic, continues to perform strongly, but also takes higher education as an investment, not as an expenditure. This is one of the few states within the country and globally that puts higher education on top of its agenda, and we are fortunate to be in that mix, right? So what does that mean? What is it? The state really is doing good. They do have money, and CSU is receiving some money, as Laura has said, that we are getting about $211 million or so in base fund, which is in states, accounting is a matter of perspective in some cases. It's not just two sides of the equation, there are more to that. State says they're giving us 5% of our base fund. When we look at it, it's really about 2.6% of our operating fund. Because what state is basing this 5% is based on what they give us, but we have to look at tuition fees included, right? So that's almost about 48% of our resources come from the tuition. So that means what state is giving us as a percentage, about half of what they're saying they're giving us. But nevertheless, they're giving us some money. The challenge with that is that as you all see, I'm sure that I see when you go to the grocery store, everything has gone up. So the money doesn't buy what it used to buy in the past. And that is true also for our mandatory cost, our benefits cost, our insurance cost, and our negotiated salary increases and so forth. So we have, even though CSU is getting that money, we are not getting enough to even pay our base cost. Given that, then there is also another factor that the state is giving us additional funding for about 9,300 or 9,400 additional enrollment. What you have seen and what you have heard, given where we are with our enrollment, we are not getting any part of it. So while state is giving money to CSU but not enough, SSU is getting even less of that. And so what can we do? What is it? I also want you to have a perspective of what in big pictures, what that means and so forth. When I was talking about the state puts higher education as a priority, if you add things that is higher ed or things that we care about, such as health and human services, natural resources and so forth, about 77-78% of the state's expenditure goes into causes that directly benefits us or things that we care about. And very small portion, less than 30% goes to the other portion, right? So we're looking for fine line in between. What does that mean? If there is only, if majority of the state's allocation is already coming to higher, how do you ask for more, right? What do you ask? Who should get less? So I thought I show you this side by side. The last year's actual numbers, and Laura, this is the actual number, 196, right? Actual number was 196, over 196 billion that was allocated. Percentage stays about the same. But this year, the proposed plan, government's plan, is about 213 billion. So what that means is the pie just got bigger from 196 to 213 billion. So even if we stayed with the same percentage, because it's a bigger share of, it's a bigger pie, it's the same share, we are getting more money. There is slight difference with the proposal versus actual, and I'm sure it will change. It's about 1% less than last year's actual as it's planned. As Laura had mentioned, between now and June and July, there will be a lot of conversation that will happen, and that will change the number and probably will come a bit up or down, depending on what we go in there. So we may end up getting a little more to pair off as we were, another percentage or two. That's our hope. But how are you going to get it? You usually don't get anything unless you ask for it, right? So there are two streams that the state is working on. The CSU is working on. One is the base allocation, adjusting the base salaries of compensations, mandatory cost, and other things. And enrollment increase is part of it. But the other thing is what the Department of Finance and the governor is projecting a huge surplus. These surpluses typically legislatures like to commit them in one time, not base fund, because it may not be the next year or the year after and so forth. This also, there are some constitutional mandates on how the state spends money, and these are in excess of what the constitutional, they can either put in saving rainy day funds or go to the mandatory programs such as K-12 and other and community colleges and so forth. So the state must spend this money. Our hope is we want a piece of this, right? And what Laura said earlier, that I'll talk a little bit about our focus on those funds, one-time funds. So we have proposed forward that since we are somewhat, I guess, tied, our hands tied with the enrollment numbers, we'll work with the state, with the chancellor's office, what we can get in the mandatory cost and so forth in the base fund. But in the one time, locally, we are hoping that we can get some help in really needed areas that many of you may know that the infrastructures are aging. We are solely dependent on our underground waters, and the pipe that supply them are aging. They have really done their useful portion of it. And many of you participated. In fact, yesterday we had the forum on the campus climate action plan. Sustainability is a big deal to us. We really rightfully care about it and so forth. So those are the ideas and areas that we're looking for help with the state, and we're building up the momentum. We're taking to the people who we work with. One of the other mindset that I want to share with you is that in addition to the fact that the state has budget that must spend, we also need to have this conversation somewhat localized. The people who are helping us or who could help us are our own people, our own legislature from our area. We want them to focus on their own hometown college, like ours, right? So one of the reasons I'm sharing with you is that these numbers and this information is that there is hope. The other part of it is the hope includes your participation in any way you can in your communities, in your local legislatures and policymakers, and wherever you go, because part of attracting the right people, attracting in the right numbers, to a campus is a multifaceted thing. Is you have to have the right kind of facility people like. You have to reach out to the people who like that kind of facilities and programs you have. And that comes from the communities, the conversation that we have. It's fancy word for this, branding. And branding does not happen by one person, one unit leading it, but all of us embracing it, all of us living up to this, all of us every day thinking about it and sharing those, right? So that's the perspective I wanted to share with you. I know Laura does a wonderful job. I have seen even prior to coming here, her presentations and things that she puts on the website publicly available and so forth. So I didn't have to worry about that part, but I thought I'd share with you a different perspective on how the finances for the CSU and our campus as a whole work, and what we are doing, and how you might be able to help us take those conversations, right? And I believe with this, we are going to wrap up the online version for people who have joined us remotely, and we're going to gather together the back for a roundtable conversation